Hey, my name is Matt Stohrer and I repair saxophones for a living. And today I would like to talk to you about something that is very simple but also very misunderstood. And that is oiling your saxophone. And where I'll start is by saying that oiling your saxophone is actually the wrong way to even describe it. It describes something you don't want to do, and it describes something that, if done in the long term, can actually damage your saxophone. The way most people care for their saxophones, the way most people oil their saxophones, is actually worse for the instrument than not oiling it at all. And the reason being, because just like with your car, you do not add oil constantly. You don't just keep waiting for the oil to dry up or disappear, or do whatever it is that it does, and then add more until your oil line is full again. So why would you do that on saxophone? Now, the reason is actually the same in both the car and the saxophone. In your car, the reason that you change the oil rather than just oil your car is because the oil over time fills up with the byproducts of combustion, which are little bits of particulate, basically all the stuff that would come out in your smoke from your tailpipe ends up in your oil and turns that nice clear to gold oil that you put into it into the much darker, more viscous stuff that comes out. And the same thing actually happens with your saxophone, although obviously it's not byproducts of combustion. It is merely just grime and grit and particulate and dust from the air, because your saxophone keys are much more open to the air. Now what this particulate inside your oil does is turns a lubricant into an abrasive. And there's actually a name for this. It's called lapping compound. Now what lapping compound is oil with a very specific particulate added. It's basically liquid sandpaper. And that is what happens to old oil, whether it is in your car or in your saxophone. And over the long term, if you just keep adding new oil to the stuff that's already on there, all you're doing is giving the grit and grime and particulate that's all jammed up in here new life. And you are letting it circulate around inside your key and wear it down day after day. And this can turn into a very expensive problem over time. And when you're looking at a saxophone, say, like this one, which is about, 80 years old at this point, over that much time, if it is not properly taken care of, you can end up with a lot of play in your mechanism. And that is a very expensive problem to fix. And for the reasons that you would need to fix that, check out my other video. I believe it's called Repair Topic, G-sharp Bis Adjustment and the Importance of Key Fitting. I think that's what it's called. So check that video out if you want to see why it is important to have your keys fit very precisely. So, adding oil. The way most people do it is they take a very light oil, and this is actually extremely old. I haven't used this in a very long time, probably since I last worked on a flute, which was a few years ago. They take a thin oil and they just dab it on the parts of the hinge tubes where there are openings. And they let that really thin stuff wick in there, and it has to be thin because it needs to fit in there and wick inside. And all you're doing is all the grime and grit that is built up around these openings in the key, because someone probably oiled it that way before, all you're doing is sucking all that stuff inside. So in addition to just giving the grime and grit that's already inside new life, you're actually pulling more stuff in there with it. And this can easily be seen, let's see, nice white clean Q-tip here. See that? I mean, that is dirt. That's grit. That's particulate. And if I were to add oil here, at least some of this is going to get sucked into the key. So you're actually making a bad situation worse when you oil the saxophone from the outside. So if you've got the thin oil that you can buy at a music store and you've been adding it to the outside of your keys, stop now, throw away that oil. The stuff you want is thick oil, much thicker. I use the Ultimax oil system from musicmedic.com. I almost always use the heavy oil, and for hinge tubes, and for pivot screws and rollers I use their grease, which comes in a handy dandy syringe. And what I'm going to show you today is a hinge tube. So if you want to change the oil in your saxophone the right way, what you have to do is disassemble it, because you have to take out the old stuff. You have to remove the old oil. And unlike a car, we can't just unscrew a bolt and drain all the old stuff out. We actually need to disassemble the saxophone. Okay. So the first thing I am going to show you is, got a nice clean paper towel here. This is naphtha, which is basically lighter fluid. If you get that Ronsonol stuff at a local drugstore, it's basically the same stuff. Or you can get naphtha from a hardware store, though it comes in a much larger amount usually. And this is something that you can do yourself if you're interested in DIY. Otherwise, this is merely educational. And this serves to show you why you should, rather than just add oil to your saxophone, every couple of years you should have it disassembled, cleaned, re-oiled, adjusted, and put back together. So here's the hinge tube. Just took it out. I have not oiled this. I haven't touched this. And actually, this is one of my horns I'm about to do an overhaul on. So I'm just using this opportunity to show you what this looks like. Oh man, look at all that stuff. It's even inside the threads. So that just came off our hinge tube. Here's the hinge tube looks like now. A lot cleaner, right? Now also, off camera, I've got a Scotch-Brite wheel in my bench motor, and I am going to Scotch-Brite this real quick to get the last little bit of lacquered grime off of it. Okay, so that is all ready to go. I'm actually going to go over the threads one more time. Try and get all that stuff out of there. Okay. So, got my hinge tube cleaned. Now what I want to do is clean out I've got my rod clean. Sorry, now what I want to do is clean out the hinge tube. So, take some naphtha, put it on a pipe cleaner. Good ones too. The stuff you get at craft stores is probably not the best. The stuff I use you can get on Amazon. It is named, funnily enough, BJ Long pipe cleaners. Probably named back in the day before they recognized irony. So put some naphtha on your pipe cleaners and always pull through. Don't pull it back out. You don't want to put anything back in there that you took out. And then I cut off the tip of the BJ Long pipe cleaner. Go back through. Make sure it comes out clean. Okay. Now I'm going to do the same thing on my other key. Okay. Cut that off. Oh, still a little bit dirty. Go through it one more time. Okay. Now the next thing I want to do, now that I've got the inside of my hinge tubes clean, I want to clean the faces of the hinge tube. So I take naphtha and I wipe these down. And you may see a bunch of stuff come off, you might not see a lot. It's very important that you do this because these are the gaps, right? This is where the oil could come in contact. So you want to make that really clean. Okay, and at the end, blow out the hinge tubes from any leftover stuff that came off your BJ Longs. And then, now I want to clean out the posts. Same thing. Pull them through, cut it off. Make sure you're clean. And yes, even the threaded part. Be lots of nasty stuff in there too. Oh, and make sure you do the naphtha stuff in a well-ventilated area. Okay. And then last thing I do is clean off the facings of the posts. Make sure everything looks good. Okay, so since we did not add oil, but changed it, look at all that gross stuff that came out of there. Whoops, not this. All that is particulate that is abrasive. And if we hadn't have gotten it out of there, it wouldn't have mattered if we'd added oil or if we didn't. Really, it's just wearing down the key, causing damage in the long run, taking away metal that we cannot put back. So, now to put oil back in, what you want to do is take a nice, high quality, thick oil. Look at the way the key sits. Look at the way the hinge tube, or the rod goes into the hinge tube, and put a drop of oil at the entrance of every key that is on that rod. You don't need a ton, particularly if the keys are well fit. If the keys are really, really well fit, you may use a medium oil. Or the benefit of this stuff, the Ultimax stuff I get from Music Medic, is you can mix it to make different viscosities. And then, so when you've got that oil in the hinge tubes, you can reassemble the key. And what's going to happen is as we insert the hinge tube, it's going to push the oil down inside. And you want to spin this as you insert it, and you also want to take a little bit of oil and put it on the hinge tube. What that's going to do is as this oil gets pushed down to the end, this is going to ensure that we still have oil up in the top side of the hinge tube. Spin it as it goes in. And you're going to have some squeeze out. I like to hold a little paper towel at the end so that I can catch it as it comes out rather than letting it drip down the post. Okay, so I caught the oil that came out the end there. Wipe the excess off here. Wipe the excess off wherever you have any. Make sure you always use a clean part of your, whatever it is you're using to wipe it off each time. You don't just want to get everything greasy, because that's just going to attract dirt. Okay, so now we have a freshly oiled key. I'm going to go ahead and put my springs back in. Okay, and that is how you oil hinge tube keys on a saxophone. And what we did there was we took out the old stuff, and you can see even my hands are a little bit dirty just from all the grit and grind that's in there. Although this was not that bad compared to what I see a lot. I used, I think, only one pipe cleaner for these two keys, and a little bit of paper towels. Often it's much, much grodier than this, particularly because people have a habit of getting their horns overhauled, 20, 30 years ago, and doing a couple pads at a time, and kind of like, it's like how painters paint big bridges. They start at one side, and then 2 years later, they finally get to the other side, and then they come back and just start again. And that's kind of what people do with pads. They just change them as they need changed, and they never actually disassemble the saxophone because they're only working on a little bit of it at a time. And the byproduct of this is that people might have pads that are sealing really well, but their oil hasn't been changed in 20 years, and they're basically just slowly wearing away the most important bearing surfaces in their saxophone. So flute players, especially professional flute players, are a little hipper to this, and they've got a service they call COA, Clean Oil Adjust. And what that is basically you take your horn in, and every year, 2 years, possibly up to 3 years, depending on how much you play, and you have it completely disassembled, pads and stuff still in it. You have the body cleaned because there's no corks or felts on it, so you can actually clean that really well. And then the keys are hand cleaned, much like I just showed you. And then it is assembled in the same order that it would be for an overhaul, checked over as it's going back together. Any adjustments need to be made, any pads need to be changed or done at that time, and new oil is put in clean keys. And what this does, if you do this to a saxophone, is it keeps your horn in better condition longer. It feels more like you just had an overhaul for longer. And it actually doesn't cost a whole lot more in the long run than it would to continue doing things the way you've been doing, except rather than spending money on fixing your key work every 20 years, your key work is still in good shape. You're just paying to keep it in good shape by having it cleaned, and it feels better the entire time. So it's really, it's a win for the saxophone, and it's a win for you if you do this method instead of adding oil, which, as I say, is just, it's really bad for the instrument over the long run. So, clean, oil, adjust. Depending on how much you play, I would recommend doing it once every 1 to 2 years. If you don't play the horn much, 3 is probably fine. Although the oil, even the best stuff, does dry up a little bit over time and kind of can become gunky and gummy. So it's probably a good idea to get that taken care of. So, oiling your saxophone. You probably never knew it could be so complicated and have so much thought put into it. But these are machines. They are very, very precise machines. And there is a reason, there is a way to do things the best way, and there is always a reason to do things that way. And the saxophone will tell you. This is not rocket science. I don't think I'm the first person ever to, well, I know I'm not the first person ever to come up with this. But it's probably the first time that it's been explained for so long on YouTube. But if you're interested in keeping your saxophone in good shape in the long term, this is something that you really should look into doing. And you can do it yourself if you're interested in DIY. The only problem you might run into is if your saxophone did not have a good overhaul to start with, if it's held together with rubber bands and baling wire, you're probably going to run into some issues that have been hidden by the saxophone being assembled, and you may get in over your head very quickly trying to put it back together. But if you've got a good overhaul on it, or if it's a well-made saxophone, and it's relatively new, say Yamaha or Yanagasawa, then you should, even fairly amateur people who've only maybe taken a key or two off before should be able to do it. But I would probably recommend, unless you're pretty into fixing your own horn, just to take it to a reputable and good repairman every couple years and have this done. And it's really going to pay dividends in the long run. And it's just best for you and the horn. And the mechanical work that is necessary to fix the long-term problems coming from lubricating your horn with an abrasive is difficult and time-consuming, and not a whole lot of people do it right. So you get yourself into a situation where you've got some difficult, expensive work that needs to be done, and not a lot of people do it right. So you kind of get on this slippery slope where your saxophone is just getting in worse and worse shape over time, where if you just stop it from going down that slippery slope in the first place, you can keep your horn in much better shape for, these horns will last lifetimes. This horn is already about, 80 years old. It will be around long after I'm gone, and I'm only 31. There is no reason with good care that saxophones can't last several hundred years. And it's best, especially when you've got a professional saxophone, to think of yourself as a steward of the instrument rather than its owner, because these instruments will be making music long after you are gone if you take care of them properly. So, on that note, My name is Matt Stohrer. I repair saxophones for a living. Today we talked about oiling for way longer than you probably ever thought it was possible. If you've got questions, comments, concerns, issues, something you'd like to share, you can leave a comment here on YouTube. You can send me an email. You can even give me a phone call. I actually don't mind talking on the phone, although my signal sucks because I live in the country, so it's probably best to do email. And that's about it for tonight. I'm going to be overhauling this saxophone. This is my alto that I recently acquired. And I hope to do a couple more of these type of things as I go along, kind of show you different aspects of repair as I go through them and as I can figure out the sort of good chunks, holistic pieces to do them in. So keep an eye out. I'll keep doing my repairman's overview, but I hope to do some more repair topics as time goes on. And give me your feedback. Let me know if this is helpful. Thanks for watching.